Hello, you're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. The morning began with alarming news. Why alarming? Because the Americans have carried out strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. And now the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see how Iran will respond. Iran really only has two options: either surrender or strike back at American bases. Trump has already spoken, issuing threats. He said that if Iran doesn't immediately agree to the terms being put forward, there will be new, harsher strikes. In other words, Iran won't be able to just sit this out, and if they intend to keep resisting, which it seems they do, they'll have to strike back at US bases. We continue to analyze the situation on the Ukrainian front. Let's move to the map. So friends, over the past 24 hours, we've had some very good news from the front. Another section of the front line collapsed for the Ukrainian armed forces, and again in the same location, in the south of the Donetsk region. Let me show you right away. Take a look. A very large area has come under our control. And just so you understand, this collapse allowed us to take control of 60 square kilometers in a single day. But we'll return to that in a moment. First, I want to talk about the Sumy region. Yesterday, Zelensky gave a speech and claimed that Russian forces advanced by 200 meters in the Sumy region. I have no idea what you'd have to take to say something like that. Maybe he meant 200 square kilometers, not meters? Because yes, over 200 square kilometers have already come under our control in Sumy region. Meanwhile, during a recent forum, Putin said that the city of Sumy is not a strategic objective. But he didn't rule anything out. As I've said before, Sumy, at least for now, is not the goal of the summer offensive campaign. If it were, it wouldn't just be infantry on ATVs and motorcycles advancing. Much larger and more powerful forces would be involved. The goal of this operation is clear. It's to create a buffer zone and, importantly, to force the Ukrainian military to divert reserves to this area. Which they did. They transferred reserves here in an attempt to halt our advance. Did they succeed? Let's be honest with ourselves. Yes, they did manage to stop us. Over the past week, we advanced only in one section. We pushed through in Novonikolavka. So over the course of a week, we captured just 1 square kilometer here. That's it. Did the Ukrainian forces manage to reclaim anything in return? Yes, they're launching counterattacks. They tried one near the village of Yablunivka. The video of this counterattack appeared online. It was a small force, 3 Ukrainian soldiers. But on the Russian positions, there was only 1 soldier as well. As a result, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed, and 1 was wounded and taken prisoner. I posted the video on my Telegram channel. Check the first comment for the link. So yes, they're counterattacking, but they're unable to drive us out. Meanwhile, because they moved reserves to Sumy, their front in southern Donetsk is literally collapsing. Last time, if you remember, as soon as they pulled some forces from there and moved them to Sumy, we collapsed that front by almost 100 square kilometers in just 2 days. Back then, we took control of Alexiivka, Zeleny Kut, Fedorovka and Kamar and pushed into Dnipropetrovsk region. Now the situation is repeating itself. In the last 24 hours, they lost 50 square kilometers in that area and 2 settlements. In other words, exactly what we once talked about is happening. The Ukrainian command has to choose what to defend and what to sacrifice. They chose to defend Sumy and sacrifice the south of Donetsk. Let's see where that leads them. The collapse on the Ukrainian side has been massive. The advance in this area was more than 8.5 kilometers. In fact, it was even greater. The area near Yalta and the settlement of Zirka hasn't been marked yet by American cartographers, but we've already approached both. So in reality, the advance is closer to 10 kilometers. But let's stick with the figures acknowledged by the American maps. So our troops from the Vostok group managed to cause another collapse on the front. Not the whole front, of course, but a localized collapse in their area of responsibility. The territory that came under our control in that section alone is 49.5 square kilometers. We captured the settlement of Zaporizhia. A video showing our flags in the village appeared online yesterday. You can see objective control footage confirming our troops are indeed there. And the flags weren't just raised in one place. They were put up all over the village, confirming full control of the settlement. The question now is, what happens next? Next, the remaining territory up to the river will be cleared. This includes the villages of Yalta and Zirka. The area is small, less than 20 square kilometers remain until we reach the natural boundary of the river. After that, the likely next step is crossing the river and moving toward Filia. Here is the village. It's located on the southern approaches to Novopavlivka. And here's the current situation. From our current positions, it's 8.5 kilometers to Novopavlivka. From the Orikov area, it's 7 kilometers. So conditions are being created to reach Novopavlivka from 2 directions. Actually, no, 3 directions. Don't forget the significant progress made slightly to the north. Fighting is already underway for the last village before the Dnipropetrovsk region, Muravka. From those positions, it's also 8.5 kilometers to Novopavlivka. So the Ukrainian Armed Forces logistical hub will soon be under threat from 3 sides, south, east and north. Under such circumstances, Novopavlivka certainly won't hold. As you can see, our army is operating by the book, surrounding a major settlement from all directions. Very smart tactics. But keep in mind, Ukraine's problems weren't limited to this area. There was also a collapse further south. That collapse was smaller, not 50 square kilometers, but 10. However, we took a much larger settlement there than Zaporizhzhia in a single strike. To compare, Zaporizhzhia is basically one street with a small side road, likely called Shevchenko. And yes, this is the very Shevchenko that contains lithium reserves. There was some confusion at one point because there are 3 different Shevchenkos nearby. Anyway, just yesterday, our troops were only on the outskirts of the village, and over the past day, they managed to break through Ukrainian defenses on 2 flanks. First, our guys stormed the southern part of the village and immediately drove out the Ukrainian garrison. Then they entered from the east and cleared that side as well. After that, panic broke out among Ukrainian troops, which our forces exploited to fully take control of the village. Right now, the primary objective, of course, is to hold the village under control. There have already been reports that the Ukrainian armed forces are launching counterattacks, trying to regain control at least over the western part of Shevchenko. And we must understand that the loss of this village is a serious blow for the Ukrainian forces. A serious one in this sector, because look what's next. And what's next? The settlement of Voskresenka, and then an entirely empty stretch of land all the way to Zeleny High. Let's even measure it together. It's around 17 kilometers of territory with only one small village in between. So these excellent gains of 20, 40, even 50 square kilometers at a time, I think we're going to see more of them. So yes, once again, Zelensky's genius has worked. He pulled troops from this sector and shifted them to the Sumy direction in an attempt to slow us down there. And in return, he got a series of major collapses. And as I've already told you, this is far from over. There are also problems for the Ukrainian forces further south, in the Zaporizhzhia region. Here, a fierce battle is underway for the village of Malinivka. Our forces are already in the center of the village, and as of now, fighting continues in the northern part of Malinivka. In the previous update, I explained why the loss of this settlement would be disastrous for the Ukrainian side. There's a road here that leads directly to the city of Huliaipol. The distance, of course, is still significant, about 13 kilometers if you move along the main road in a straight line. But the important point is that over those 13 kilometers, there are only 4 small villages, all much smaller than Malinivka. That's why the Ukrainian troops are putting up such fierce resistance. They understand, if they lose Malinivka, it will be a disaster. But Russian troops continue to push forward, and at the moment, we control around 45% of the village. If we sum up the past 24 hours, the total area that came under Russian control amounts to 59.3 square kilometers, a very solid result. Now, a few words on the international situation. The United States has struck Iran, effectively altering the nature of the Iran-Israel conflict. It now resembles a plan to reshape the political landscape of the Middle East, something former US President George W. Bush once tried and failed to accomplish after the invasion of Iraq. Of course, the real target of this attack is not Iran's nuclear program, but rather the dismantling of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a political regime. If Tehran had some chance of withstanding Israel alone, the entry of the United States into the war means that Iran can now only mount an effective defense with support from China and Russia, most likely in the form of proxy assistance. Whether Beijing and Moscow are willing to engage Washington in the Middle East directly determines not only the fate of Iran, but also much more. By eliminating Iran as a partner of China and Russia, the United States is successfully pursuing an important geopolitical goal, severing China's Eurasian logistical corridors and pushing it out of the Middle East, and eventually out of South Asia altogether, while simultaneously creating critical security threats for Russia in the Caspian region, the North Caucasus, and the Volga region. At first glance, the logic of national security interests for both China and Russia clearly points toward the necessity of helping Iran. However, the Trump administration is playing a political game with both Beijing and Moscow, promising the former a moderate future policy on Taiwan and an acceptable trade deal while misleading them, and offering the latter a supposedly constructive American approach to resolving the conflict in Ukraine, again under false pretenses. Whether the Chinese and Russian leadership realize after the attack on Iran that the Trump administration is just as unreliable as Biden's remains an open question. But it's a question that will be answered very soon. For now, it must be noted that this level of diplomatic deception has not been seen in Washington in a long time. First, there were negotiations between the US and Iran, during which the American side actively demonstrated friendliness, negotiated, by the way, by the same Stephen Witkoff, who for some reason made a very positive impression in the Kremlin. Meanwhile, preparations for the attack were in full swing behind the scenes, under the cover of those talks. Then came the strike, accompanied by acts of sabotage carried out in a style that strikingly resembled the attack on Russia's strategic deterrent forces. After the Israeli strike, Donald Trump claimed it was an isolated Israeli action and that the US had nothing to do with it, although it was more than obvious that this wasn't true. Then, very recently, the US president announced a 2-week pause before any decision would be made. Another complete lie, because less than 48 hours later, the American strike took place. All of this clearly shows the nature of the Trump administration. But the core issue is something else entirely. The real question now being decided in the Middle East is, will the United States be allowed to keep striking its opponents one by one or not? If anything was damaged most severely by the US strike on Iran, it's the reputation of Donald Trump and his administration, both internationally and domestically. Trump has demonstrated his unreliability in global politics and his use of negotiations as a smokescreen for launching military aggression against another country. Within the United States, this is inevitably going to trigger the unraveling of the fragile Republican majority that rallied around the current American president and brought him victory in the elections. Very soon, Trump's core base, the MAGA Republicans, will begin to drift away from their idol, which will significantly weaken his political standing and almost certainly destroy Vice President James Vance's chances of winning the White House. As for the situation around Iran itself, as we already wrote, it now directly depends on whether China and Russia choose to step in. If they do, they could catch the United States off guard and drag it into a new major war in the Middle East. Should Beijing and Moscow take this path, they will thereby make it significantly easier for themselves to resolve their own geopolitical objectives in Taiwan and in Ukraine. For the US, the only scenario that looks like a true victory is Iran's quick surrender, ideally within a few weeks. But if the war drags on, Washington is in for serious trouble. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next updates. See you soon. There's much more ahead.